part of Chicago's history. Now, we're going to learn a lot about the history of this city, especially how we became one of the architectural capitals of the world. I'll tell you, that did not happen overnight. I can tell you what did happen over two, though. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871. That destroyed 66% of this city. You're laughing. It destroyed 70,000 homes and businesses, 100,000 people homeless, killed more than 250 people. Now, prior to this fire, this entire city, all of it, was made out of wood and cast iron. We're not just talking about the buildings, folks. We're talking about the streets and sidewalks as well. Made of wood. This whole city went up in flames. But with the help of the Bessemer process for rolling out steel and the invention of the elevator or lift, folks, the city was able to rise from the ashes like a roaring phoenix. Create the most beautiful architecture the world has ever seen. Now, that first skyscraper in history was designed here in Chicago. That used to stand over on LaSalle and Adams Street. It's no longer there. It was known as the Home Insurance Building. Now get this, that first skyscraper ever, it stood at a whopping 10 stories tall. Woo! Incredibly underwhelming. But back then, people were terrified to walk into the building's shadow. They were afraid the thing would fall over. Things have obviously changed, right? We've been building a lot higher. We got other things to be scared about. Now, the way I like to look at, I like to give my tours is I like to ask you to look at the buildings as a whole. Because we walk past these buildings every day. We occupy them. We never actually appreciate them for their work. For instance, the London House over here to our left. Now, this was built in 1923 by Alfred Alschuler. See, it has a decorative bottom, stack of floors with a decorative top. Now, this is known as the London House for the famous jazz nightclub which used to occupy its first floor. But this was also the site of Fort Dearborn. This is where Chicago actually began. And we're going to look up here to our right. You're going to see the second tallest building in Chicago. This is the Trump International Hotel and Tower. This is designed in 2009 by Adrian Smith. Now, Adrian Smith, he is the same architect that designed the world's tallest building. Do any of you know what building that is? Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Now, to give you all an idea of how tall that building is, picture two of these stacked on top of one another, and then some. Yahweh. Yeah, I know, unnecessarily tall. Now, we're going to talk about these three distinct setbacks as the building goes up when we come down the main branch of the river once again. But this is contextualism. Adrian Smith is paying homage to the exact height of landmarks that surround the building. Now, the largest penthouse at the top of this building, standing around 14,000 square feet, sold in 2014 for $17 million to a family in the suburbs. That's their second home. Up to our right, this is the American Medical Association. This is the former IBM building. Now, once again, folks, look at it as a whole. It's a giant black box. This is the international style of architecture designed by the famous German architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Now, his philosophy of architecture being less is more. So look, there's very low ornamentation other than those strong I-beams. Folks, this was so experimental for its time. He's a minimalist. He's trying to bring architecture back down to its form and its function. Many of the students, though, did not agree with this. In fact, the next two buildings over here to our right were designed by his student, Bertrand Goldberg. These are the Marina City Towers, cleverly named the Corncob Towers, because we are here in the Midwest. Now, compare and contrast these two buildings with his teacher. It's obvious that he completely rejects that less is more philosophy, comes up with his own. Passive-aggressively being, there are no right angles in nature, so there should not be any right angles in architecture. That sounds pretty passive-aggressive compared to who his teacher was. So he designs these two buildings with two 60-story concrete-reinforced cylindrical cores. They stretch all the way to the top, erecting 896 apartments, each of which are shaped like giant slices of pizza. They're very narrow at the entrance and they expand out to the balcony. Now, it was also experimental for its time. In fact, the Mies van der Rohe and Bertrand Goldberg, their relationship was not that great. In fact, when Mies van der Rohe heard that his student was designing these two buildings next door to him, he called him up and he said, "Are you really about to do this to me?" And Bertrand Goldberg said, "Yup." That was the last time the two ever spoke. Yep. Now, you guys notice how the river has this sort of bluish and greenish tint to it? It is not because we dye our river that bright Kelly green every St. Patrick's Day weekend. It is because the river has a clay bottom with algae that grows along the top of it. With the constant influx of fresh lake water, churns the algae up in the river, gives it that greenish tint. But up here to our right is the Reed Murdoch Center. This was built in 1914 by George Nimitz. Now, once again, look at it as a whole, folks. You'll notice the building is not symmetrical. You can count 6 bays going to the right and only 5 going to the left. And that's because with the expansion of the LaSalle Street Bridge straight ahead of this boat, they cut one entire bay off the end of this building to make room for the bridge. But you'll barely notice it. Look, they redesigned the entire end over here to look like the opposite one, so you'd never notice that they cut an entire bay off the building. It's very subtle. Hi. Over here to our right. I don't mind waving. We're getting people that just shout out at the boat, and it's just, what are you yelling at? Over here to our right is 300 North LaSalle Street, designed by Picard and Chilton in 2009. Now, folks, this building is the greenest building along the main branch of the river. Now, this is platinum certified in LEED. That stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. That is basically the Oscars of architectural engineering. This building is almost entirely made out of recyclable material. But get this, does not have air conditioning towers. To cool itself down, it pumps up fresh river water, circulates it throughout the interior of the building, which cools it down. Then it pumps all the water right back into the river. The water then comes out cleaner than when it went in. The building cleans out the river water. How cool is that? Right? Over here to our right is the Merchandise Mart, built in 1923 through 1930 by Graham Anderson Probes and White. Now, this right here, folks, this was the largest concrete reinforced building in the country up until the Pentagon was built. This building used to have its own zip code. 4.25 million square feet of space. But that was designed to accommodate 14 warehouses for the Marshall Fielding Company, who had trouble holding on to this building due to the Great Depression. So he sold this building in 1945 for $13 million in back taxes to the Kennedy family, to which the Kennedy family sold the building again in 1998 for $575 million. So, talk about interest. Over here to our right, you're going to see Wolf Point. Now, this is where Chicago set its roots down, and folks, this is where Chicago got its name. Now, the word Chicago, it derives from the French pronunciation of the Native American term Chicagoan. And that means two things: strong and powerful, smelly wild onions. That's what Chicago means. Because of all the onions and the garlic that used to grow along the banks of the river here. It also translate to city of strong smells. So, we're going to look straight ahead of the boat. You're going to see River Point. Now, this was designed by Picard and Chilton also. It is gold certified in LEED. Now look, it reflects every other building around it, and within the arc at the base there, it reflects the bend of the river. This whole facade here is designed to pay homage to the landmarks to the back of the boat. 333 West Wacker Drive does the exact same thing, but we'll talk about that building more as we come out of the South Branch. Because also, folks, you got a couple opportunities to take a picture of the main branch of the river. This is going to be your first out of 3. Highly recommend a few pictures. I also have to say, although it is chilly, this has to be the most beautiful November tour I have ever given. So kudos to you guys. It's cloudless today. Over here to our left, you're going to see Residence at River Bend, designed in 2001 by the architect James DeStefano. You're going to hear that name a couple of other times on the tour today, folks. Now, this is once again contextualism. As the river begins to bend, you'll see how the building slightly mimics that. That's so as well. Now, we're going to see this just north of it, this building sheathed in brick. This is the Fulton House, designed in 1908 by George Abbott. Now, this was a former cold storage facility for milk, butter, eggs, and cheese. But look to the top trim of the building. See those nautical portholes up there? That is a signature of the architect Harry Weiss. Now, he only renovated this building back in the mid to late 1980s. The problem is, when he did that, he removed over 500 truckloads of matted horsehair and cork that insulated the building. Problem is, you remove the insulation to a building, the building's going to fall apart. They just finished resheathing the entire exterior over the last year and a half. You can see some of that over there. Now we're going to look over here to our left. These are the Chicago River cottages, also designed by Harry Weiss. Now these are 4 different townhouses. You see, he's still exploring the equilateral triangle and those nautical portholes to make each one of these 4 townhouses, designs them to kind of look like a pilot house, right? Now, my friends, as we pass under the Kinsey Street Bridge, I'm going to be speaking a little softer into it, because I have been notified by several residents of Kinsey Park over here that I specifically have a very loud voice. They know me by name, which is concerning. So, you also bought a house on the river. So out of respect, we're going to talk about the East Bank Club. Built in 1978 by Ezra Gordon. Now you're going to notice how this facade looks a little drab. That's because back in the 1970s, you really did not want to look at the Chicago River. It was disgusting. So they turned their back on the river so the occupants wouldn't have to look at it. Now since then, they've tried to welcome it back some open arms. They've added a seawall, trees, ivy, flowers to make it look a little better. Now this is a sort of a part of the boom that started occurring back in the 1980s. Folks, you have to know that the north branch of the river has been primarily industrial for a very long time. It was up until the early 2000s, it's been experiencing this sort of residential boom. An example of that is Kinsey Park. Now these were designed by George Papageorge to mimic European row houses. It's a private gated community, but to give you an idea of how badly people wanted to live along the north branch of the river, each one of these townhouses sold for $1.2 million each before they even broke ground. Now, excuse me, can you please no standing on the seats or the benches? Excuse me, hon. Thank you so much. Don't want anybody falling over. Because that's paperwork. Yeah, this private gated community. Now, there are many old buildings that still occupy the North Branch. They didn't want to simply destroy them, so they do what's called adaptive reuse within architecture. And that really just means you recycle a building. An example of that is the Riverbank Lofts. Now these were designed by George Nimmons in 1909. He's the same architect that designed the Reed Murdoch Center, the one that wasn't symmetrical. Now he was sort of a warehouse extraordinaire for Chicago. Now, since this building was formerly a printing facility, and it's since then been repurposed to be a series of luxury lofts. These lofts have examples of what you call soft lofts. Soft lofts have all that exposed brick, exposed piping along the interior. It gives each room that really old-timey feel. That's really popular here in Chicago. Many of our old warehouses have been repurposed for that as well. Now we're going to see 2 buildings up here to our right. They're a little unfinished. This is a very rare style of architecture. We're going to see Kingsbury in the park. In a moment, you will see Erie on the park. Notice how all the steel is located on the exterior of the building. It's got an exoskeleton. This was not too popular here in the States, but Chicago embraces the experimental side of all architecture, right? Now, both were designed by Lucien Lagrange. But just in front of these 2 buildings, you're going to see this park right here. This is Aaron Montgomery Ward Park, named in honor of Aaron Montgomery Ward of the catalog. Now, speaking of him, you see that very large square building with the blue tinted glass, the 4 concrete corners? That is known as the Montgomery. That was built in 1971 by Minoru Yamasaki. Now you'll notice how the building does not have any corner offices, right? Now, that is because something Montgomery Ward stressed with his business was equality for all workers. So he helps design a building that has no corner offices, thus creating less competition for them. So no one's above or below anyone else. We've got a lot to thank him for, folks, because if it wasn't for him, Chicago would not have 28 miles of public access to its lakefront. That's because he would sue anyone that would try to build east of Lakeshore Drive. You gotta think, businesses were furious with him back then. They wanted their business on the lakefront for the views. But Montgomery Ward believed the lakefront should be for its citizens' use only, not for any sort of business. We've got a lot to thank him for. Do any of you guys remember the Aaron Montgomery Ward catalog? A couple people do? Yeah? For those of you that don't know what the catalog was, think Amazon Prime before that. Right? It's like the Amazon Prime on paper. It was like the size of a dictionary. You can get everything in it. We're talking what? Like boats, houses, pianos, cars, caskets, whatever you needed. You'd receive the catalog, you'd circle what you wanted, you'd call up your local Aaron Montgomery Ward store or their old office building, which was just up here to our right. They'd ship it right to you. This since then has been repurposed to be a series of luxury condominiums. Now, another thing that Montgomery Ward stressed with his business was efficiency. He wanted his business to work like a well-oiled machine. So every order placed in this old office building, they were then shipped through a series of tunnel systems. They reach under the Chicago Avenue Bridge over here to the Domain, and that sits just across the street from the old office. Now, we're going to have a picture opportunity in just a moment, folks. We're going to pass underneath the bridge. You're going to look over your right shoulder on top of this building. You're going to see a statue standing on top of a ziggurat, and it's known as Progress Lighting the Way. This is what Aaron Montgomery Ward believed his entire business to stand for. It's going to be just when we pass underneath the bridge. Yeah, it's going to be just over your right shoulder here. Gorgeous, right? Now, we'll be turning momentarily. Just want to let you guys know that it's there. But over here to our right, this is the Domain. This was designed in 1909 by Schmidt, Garden, and Martin. I know, I love this building too. Now, this is the prairie style of architecture. You typically see this style in the suburbs. It's huge, right? Now, this style was popularized by Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, due to the invention of the interwebs, the Aaron Montgomery Ward catalog, since then, has gone bankrupt. Now this building is occupied by restaurants, residences, as well as Groupon. Now when Groupon renovated this building in 2003, get this, they removed over 500 pairs of old roller skates. Remember the ones that used to clip on the bottom of your shoes? He stressed efficiency, folks. He asked every one of his employees to roller skate up and down the corridors of the buildings to fill their orders faster. Yeah. Now you'll notice how the North Branch forks off into two different directions here. One that goes to the right, that's entirely man-made by Chicago's first mayor, William Ogden. Now William Ogden also owned a brick company. Being totally aware the Chicago River base has this clay bottom, he digs out that section of the North Branch to capitalize on his own city. But that creates Goose Island, which is just to the back of our boat as well. Entirely man-made. Now Goose Island, it does not get the name Goose Island from the beer, which I hear is on top downstairs, ladies and gentlemen. That is a shameless plug. It gets the name Goose Island from the Irish immigrants, which used to occupy that island to raise geese for their food. Actually, Goose Island has never had a brewery on Goose Island. They just took the name. Yeah. Now, you'll notice that the left fork is still primarily industrial. It's not as dirty as it used to be, but, you know, still pretty dirty. In the city of Chicago, we've been taking many maneuvers to clean up the north and south branches of the river. You'll notice the difference in color. The main branch of the river has that beautiful bluish and greenish tint to it, versus the north and south branches have this sort of deep, soul-sucking forest green color. They say by 2030, we'll be able to swim in the river again. Now, there are also some maneuvers to turn the riverfront into what the lakefront is for a lot of our citizens, runners and cyclists. Eventually, you'll be able to bike or run from the northwest side or the south side of Chicago all the way to the loop along the riverfront. Pretty great. We're going to have another opportunity for Progress Lighting the Way in just a moment. You'll be able to get Groupon in the frame if you want. If you so choose. Use the hashtag Wendella. Hashtag Dave's the best tour guide. It's going to be patented. Anyway, as we continue heading south down the North Branch, we don't have much architecture to talk about. We have to talk about how the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 started. Now, to give you an idea of how large this fire was, the fire burned from 1200 South Roosevelt Street all the way up to about 2400 North Fullerton Avenue. It's about 5 or 6 miles. And 800 West Halsted Street all the way to the lake. But the reason why this fire was so large was because over a 2-month period, the entire Midwest, all of it, had really only experienced about 1.5 inches of rain. And it's a city made of wood, so there's a very intense drought, and with strong southwestern winds, It was creating what are known as fire devils, basically fire tornadoes. So, terrifying. We know the fire started on the southwest side of the city in Mrs. O'Leary's barn, but we don't know specifically what started that fire. Although I'm sure many of you guys know the story of Mrs. O'Leary and her cow. Yeah? Does anybody know the song?
Yes.
Yeah? You can always tell the who at the camp by who knows that song. For those of you that don't know the story of the cow, it goes a little something like this. Late one night, when the city of Chicago was all in bed, Mrs. O'Leary put a lantern in her shed. She began to milk her cow Daisy. Well, her cow got a little excited. It knocked that lantern over, set the barn on fire, burnt down the entire city of Chicago. The story is that a cow started the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. We actually now know the story of the cow. It's not true. Yeah, even though that's the theory the entire city still believes in to this day. It's because a New York journalist later came forward and admitted that he had made up the story of the cow because he wanted a more interesting story. But the guy was a writer. He couldn't have been more creative. Folks, Mrs. O'Leary never lived down that story. It took up until 1990 for this city to exonerate her. Let's put this into perspective. The fire happened in 1871. They exonerated her in 1990. She had been dead, that poor woman had been dead for nearly 115 years. Now, there are several theories as to what might have started the Great Chicago Fire, because it wasn't a cow. But the first theory is that Mrs. O'Leary had a lot of gambling debt, and that her barn was collateral. That's plausible. There are also some theories that she had affiliations with the mob. But here's the theory I believe in, folks. I wholeheartedly believe that a meteor shower started the fire. I know what you're thinking. Hold on, hear me out. The reason why I say this is because the exact same night as the Great Chicago Fire, 2 other cities within the Midwest burnt to the ground the exact same night. You guys ever heard of the Peshtigo Fire in Wisconsin? Or the Metz Fire in Michigan? Those 2 fires started on the same night as the Great Chicago Fire. More people perished in both of those fires than ours. You don't hear a lot about them because they were more rural areas. We took all the media attention. Now, folks, we had to rebuild quickly. So, the fire was still devastating. We rebuilt around 19 years, best we could. And then Daniel Burnham, our city's planner, started hearing that the U.S. government was calling for a city to house the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. Now, this is a very prestigious fair. It would put us back on the map. Now, the fair was designed to celebrate Christopher Columbus's 400th anniversary of his discovery of the Bahamas. Because he didn't discover America, so. But it was so important for us because it would put us back on the map. Daniel Burnham knew we needed this fair, so to get the fair, he sent Chicago's best politicians to go lobby Congress for the fair. We won. And then a New York journalist got jealous, wrote in an article, "I cannot believe Congress gave those windy windbags from Chicago the fair." And that's how we got the name the Windy City. It's not because of our strong winds. It's because of our windy politicians. Has anything changed? We also get the name the Second City. It's not because we're second to New York. New Yorkers love saying that. We get the name the Second City because we are the second city to be built on the land of Chicago. Lost our first one to the fire, built a second one on top of it, right? Now, folks, you gotta think this fair was important because like half the population of the U.S. was coming to our city, circulating through our city over a 6-month period. Now, Daniel Burnham knew we had to house a lot of these people, so he designed over 250 buildings out of wood, cast iron, and staff, painted all of it white, and he called it the White City. Have any of you ever read the book, The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson? Nobody on this boat? Folks, it's such a good book. Now, I highly recommend picking this book up. It tells the story of the fair from 2 perspectives. Daniel Burnham, our city's planner, as well as America's first serial killer, H.H. Holmes, who used the fair as a tactic to capture many of his victims. It won the Pulitzer. It reads like fiction, but it's entirely based in Eric Larson's research. Once again, that was The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. Now, many attractions also came out of this fair. In fact, if it wasn't for the fair, we would not have things like the brownie, Aunt Jemima's pancake mix, Cracker Jacks, the zipper, Nikola Tesla's alternating current. Actually, in that book, in The Devil in the White City, there's an entire section of the battle between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, the direct versus the alternating current, took place during the World's Fair. We should also talk about how Thomas Edison invented nothing, folks. He just stole all of Tesla's ideas, learned how to market them better. There's an entire section in that book of Thomas Edison electrocuting live animals in front of people, said it was Tesla's design to smear his name. Yeah. This is a very intimidating bridge. It was built in 1908. It's been sitting there since 1978. It was the first railroad bridge to cross the Chicago River. Now, also, two other things came out of the World's Fair. Things like PBR, which, we all could do with that. But also, the Ferris wheel. Now, PBR, Pabst Blue Ribbon, was originally known as Pabst Beer. It was actually entered into a beer contest during the World's Fair. They got a blue ribbon, and so they changed their name to Pabst Blue Ribbon for marketing purposes. But everybody believes that that was a first place ribbon. That was a participation ribbon. Which makes sense, because anybody that's ever tried PBR knows that it's not that great. Buy a 30-pack in the Midwest, everybody calls it a dirty 30. Yeah. Now, the world's first Ferris wheel came out of the fair. It could accommodate up to 1,800 passengers. That is 60 passengers per car, 40 sitting, 20 standing. There was also one car on that Ferris wheel which was dedicated to an entire orchestra, which would play the same song over and over for 6 months. They never found the sheet music. And, they asked a bunch of musicians to play the same song over and over. They'll burn everything they can find. And then they will break up. That is what happened to One Direction. That's what happened to NSYNC. I'm still heartbroken about NSYNC. Not too bad. Here to our right, you're going to see this building that looks like a bad game of Jenga. This is 150 North Riverside, designed by the Getch Partners. Now, folks, I had the privilege about 7 months ago now to attend their architectural firm. I learned a lot about this building. They're not showing off with this design. This is the only way you can design a building on this plot of land. The land itself has been vacant for about 70 years. All of the rail yards are on the building's west side, while the river is on its east side. So this building, it had to be designed on a 40-foot wide concrete reinforced core. Only 40 feet. Yeah. And we all know that buildings have a tendency to sway, right? It's just a normal thing. This building, look over your right shoulder, you're going to see how narrow this space is. To balance itself out, this building uses what's called a damper system. That is generally one very large tank of water at the top of this building, with about 160,000 gallons. The wind pushes this building to one side, that water sloshes to the opposite end, balances it out. And that was primarily designed to keep its occupants from getting nauseous. Yeah. Okay. Over to our right is 100 North Riverside, designed by Perkins and Will. It's home to the Boeing headquarters. Now, just look underneath the building. You see that grid there? You're going to see those lights. This shorter section of the building, this 13-story structure, is built over the switching tracks for the Metra and Amtrak rail. Folks, this whole section of the building is not built on a foundation. It's being suspended or held up using a truss system. That cantilevers this whole section of the building over the rail yard. Picture a diving board. That's how that works. Now, I gotta preface this. When you buy your home, you also buy the air rights above your home so nobody can build above you, right? Well, the owner of that building, they pay the Metra and Amtrak rail $1.3 million a year to buy the air above the railroad tracks. That's the most American thing you're going to hear on the tour today, folks. Buying air. You buy a bag of chips instead. You always buy more air than our chips. Am I the only one that feels this way? Like, I just want more chips in my bag. Thank you. Over here to our right, this is 2 North Riverside Plaza, designed by Hullabard and Root in the Art Deco style, completely sheathed in limestone. And those windows draw your eye upward to the setbacks along the top. Now, this right here was the most popular style of architecture back in the 1920s and 1930s. The next 4 buildings on the right side of the road, so that is the west side of the river, these are all known as the Gateway Center, and they are cleverly named Gateway 1, Gateway 2, Gateway 3, and Gateway 4. All designed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. You're going to hear that name a lot on the tour, folks. They are the most prominent architectural firm in the city. Now you look just underneath the buildings, see directly into the rail yards. Each one of those pillars are strategically placed that allows a foundation to be laid on top of that, so the building can be erected on top of that foundation. Now you're probably wondering, how do office workers get any work done? It is a building designed on top of a rail yard. The buildings are designed to be soundproof, vibration-proof, and diesel-proof. Diesel fumes are pumped through ventilation shafts out of the top of the building. Now, do you all remember the large black box we saw on the main branch of the river? Look at the first two buildings. Same design. What was that noise you just made? Did you just bark at the boat? That was weird. This isn't about you. Now, this is the international style, folks. Less is more with these designs. Now, Mies van der Rohe did not design these buildings in particular. However, he popularized their style back in the Bauhaus school in Germany. But due to the Bauhaus school's socialist ideals, the Nazi party and what they were creating to be degenerate started using political pressure to force that school, from Joseph Goebbels, to force that school to close. They arrested many of the students. But Hallebard and Root brought Mies van der Rohe to Chicago. It's where he settled down, created the most groundbreaking architecture the world has ever seen. It's where he inspired an entire generation's worth of young architects and engineers, including the likes of Dr. Fazlur Khan, who designed this small black box with the X bracings here. Now, very similar to the outside of the John Hancock Tower, right? Same engineer. Here, though, he was asked to design 2 trading floors with no pillars along the interior so it wouldn't obstruct the hand signals of stockbrokers. He puts X bracings there, so all the weight is then put on the outside of the building. And now it's home to a fitness center next to a donut shop. It's counterproductive. Gateway 4 is up here to our right, but James DiStefano designed this building before he broke off from Skidmore and started his own firm. But look to the outside here. He's using 2 types of convex glass. So as you pass over it, it has that beautiful kaleidoscope effect. Gorgeous, right? Now they see what it's reflecting. Look to the other side of the boat. The beautiful Chicago River map. Yeah. You see that red pin up there? That's a "You Are Here" pin. And where you are currently at on this river. The top end is to the back of the boat, the bottom is over here. Yeah. But over here to our right, this is the former main Chicago post office, designed in 1922 through about 1933 by Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. Now, if you're from Chicago, you'll know that this building's been a bit of a problem for us. It's been sitting vacant since 1996. Yeah, they say this building's cursed. Now, before we get into that, this building had to be this large to accommodate the 3 major catalog houses in the city of Chicago. Can you guys help me name these 3 catalog houses real quick?